Well, as some of you know, in my lifetime I've had a number of activisms. I've been active in a number of areas of social need, but the one area that has been most consistent and longest lasting in my life is that of peace activism. And I can almost remember the moment in my early teens when I resolved, and have not wavered from that resolve, that somehow I would contribute to peacemaking in this world. But of course, over the course of a lifetime, I've had many different ideas about how I could contribute to this and how I could contribute with most benefit. And my thoughts about this have changed very much in those years, those intervening years between then and now. My resolution hasn't wavered, but the means by which I think this could possibly be achieved has changed. I used to think that protest was the most important thing, and I still think protest is a really important thing. I think that we need to protest against behaviours that add to the violence in this world. But I also think and know that we need to do that very compassionately, and that we need to look into our own hearts and really examine where there is self-righteousness in this, as well as the prayerful hope that a more peaceful way of living and behaving could prevail. In other words, we can bring violence very easily to our peacemaking. And I've had to learn through countless experiences how counterproductive that is. But what I've also learned, and I think some of you will have learned this too, in fact I know that some of you have learned this, is that the passion which can drive that protest can really be cultivated when what we bring to our peacemaking is primarily the gifts of love. That we begin perhaps together to understand and to affirm that we will achieve peace in our world, that we will create a more peaceful world that every child deserves, that we will create a world in which we can offer children the safety and security that they need in order to have their happiness, only when we love them more. What they suffer from is not just a paucity of peace, it's a paucity of love. We give our love far too conditionally. We give our love in piecemeal ways to this but not to that, approving this but not that, saying these children are important but those children are not. So what I think we really need to do, and we really need to think about, and we can only think about it together, and we can only achieve it together, is to think about allowing love to move through our actions, to guide our words, to facilitate our processes, and to manifest itself most of all in our conduct towards one another, so that children might experience peace. You all know whether your formation in terms of spirituality was Christian or not, you know that Jesus said this extraordinarily profound thing: unless you become as little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. What on earth could that mean? Well, it's open to interpretation, of course, but I suspect that it means that when we come into this life, we love very naturally. We have our preferences, certainly, but our preferences are generally come down to, is this person kind? Is this person less kind? They don't come down to, is this person important? Is this person not important? As children, we know instinctively what is good for us and what is less good, especially in terms of behaviour. We know that we feel happy when we are able to be with people who are appreciative, who are warm, who are consoling, who are joyful. And we know that we feel less well when we're with people who are violent or aggressive or bitter or critical. Now, that's not all, I think, that Jesus meant by that. I could imagine that he also meant, think too about the gifts of innocence. Think too about the gifts of seeing life with freshness rather than cynicism. Receive people as they are in this moment, and don't be blinded by your prejudices or your preconceptions. And in that you can experience the kingdom of heaven, which is, after all, a kingdom that we are to establish here on this earth through our conduct towards one another. It is, I assume, possible. I assume he wasn't hanging a little carrot in front of us that we could never, ever reach. And there's also, of course, the humility in it, setting aside the false pride of the ego that tells us that certain kinds of credentials make us superior to other people, rather than thinking deeply, deeply, deeply about what we share, and rather than taking seriously the notion that just as we are affected by other people, so they are constantly affected by us, so that we can love, as I said earlier, with fewer preconditions and with far more passion, and that when we fail to love, we can gather ourselves up, learn something from that, and love even more. You know, I feel more and more that every call to peace, and I think the calls to peace are particularly urgent at this time. I think we are feeling them more broadly and more richly and more diversely than ever before. And a call to peace is for me always a call to love. And I found these amazing lines from Dostoevsky. Love all creation, he said. Wow. Just that one line we could live with. Just those 3 words we could live with. Love all creation. The whole of it and every grain of sand. Love every leaf. Every ray of God's light. Love the animals, love the plants, love everything. If you love everything, you will perceive the divine mystery in things. And once you have received it, you will begin to comprehend it ceaselessly. You will become as little children, and you will be living in the kingdom of heaven, in other words. So back to him, and he says, more and more every day. More and more every day. What a call to optimism that is. That our hearts can grow larger to embrace the children of our world more and more every day. And you will at last come to love the whole world with an abiding universal love. And in thinking about putting that into practice, I thought very strongly, what would be the 4 qualities? What would be the 4 qualities that could help us, guide us to demonstrate this, to teach us that the qualities themselves that could teach us to love more passionately and more abundantly and less conditionally and with less fuss. And acceptance seemed to me to be primary. Acceptance of one another, which is so often so conditional, that we give it and we take it back and we take it back and then we give a bit of it and then we take that back. And yet our emotional maturity actually depends on a far deeper acceptance than that, and every child needs to be accepted for who they are, and so do we. We can give that as an act to ourselves on a daily basis, as we begin our day, as we begin our prayers. We can accept our lives and we can appreciate them. And appreciation is the second of these qualities. We also need to be appreciated. And in thinking about creating a more peaceful world, we must also think about speech. Is there anything in our speech that produces violence, that harms children, that harms adults, that hurts children, that hurts adults? Is there anything in our speech that is given, or the speech that we just have inside our own minds? And we can balance this, we can soften it. We can renew our capacity for peace as we renew our capacity for peaceful speech. And part of that peaceful speech is to speak aloud our appreciation of one another, our appreciation of life, not to cultivate our skills at criticism and cutting down, but to cultivate our manifest gifts of appreciation, of delight, not thinking too hard about what isn't, and thinking with rapturous delight about what is. And in doing that, of course, we generate joy. The third of the qualities is patience. And I actually think that that may not be primary, but could well be the most important one. Every day, I would suggest almost all of us do something of a disservice to another person or to ourselves because we have not yet cultivated our full heart's worth of patience. We live in a supremely impatient culture. We live in a culture in which time itself becomes a slave driver. We deprive children of the spaciousness that they need, and we deprive ourselves of the spaciousness that we also need. And so much of it comes down to not cultivating consciously a sense of patience, which is what underlies a sense of spaciousness and in fact transforms everything. As we cultivate patience with another person, we are telling them that your way of doing things is acceptable to me. We are saying something even more profound. We are saying your life, your way of being matters. It is not only my agenda that must prevail. It is not only my frustration that deserves to be expressed. No, on the contrary. Through all of this peacemaking, through all of this learning to love much less conditionally, much more passionately, what we are actually learning is the truth of our interbeing. And it is in our patience that we recognize how much we are affected by others, how we are affecting them, and how our happiness depends on that flow of the giving and receiving that is constant between all human beings and all species. Patience also with ourselves. Perhaps that's the hardest of all. How harsh we can sometimes be with our own selves. How hard it is to learn to be strong in the face of our own wrongdoings, and to say to ourselves, yes, I could do better. Yes, I could be kinder. Yes, I could be more thoughtful. Because most of us are in a state of evolution when it comes to these qualities. But we can do that compassionately. And in doing it compassionately, we are far more likely also to extend patience and compassion to others, and particularly to the most vulnerable among us. We are also teaching then by example, exactly as Ruth pointed to in her lovely talk earlier. We learn by example, we teach by example. And we teach that patience matters with one another. We teach that we can bear our frustrations. We teach that we can bear our failures and our disappointments through example. And finally, wonder. Unless you become filled with wonder you cannot perceive the kingdom of heaven. To live patiently and appreciatively is to give yourself enough space, enough time, also to experience wonder. And it is in this state of wonder that you will also glimpse bliss, that you will glimpse awe, that you will cultivate your sense of curiosity about this universe which is itself so wondrous, about this life that each of us has, which is itself a miracle. Being a little bit more inclined to acknowledge the miracle of our own lives, we will also be more inclined to acknowledge and bow down in front of the miracle that is every life, and to honour it, and to find it entirely natural that we would wish to create, to contribute to give to peace for all. If you love everything, you will perceive the divine mystery in all things. And once you have received this knowledge, you will begin to comprehend it ceaselessly, more and more every day, and you will at last come to love the whole world with an abiding universal love. And you will have at last come to live, perhaps this very day, the kingdom on earth.